night.
What would drive you to feeling so hopeless that this one relationship that you probably wouldn't even remember in a few years became the crux of your life and the destroyer of futures and potential?
What if your final moments were witnessed by your closest friends? Imagine having dinner at home, chatting with friends on FaceTime, when suddenly your life ends in violence, broadcast in real time to those who care about you most. This isn't fiction. This was the horrifying reality for 19-year-old Kelvi McCrae. Have you ever wondered if someone you know is silently suffering behind closed doors? Or perhaps you've dismissed concerning behavior from a partner as just a bad day? The chilling truth is that for thousands of people, these warning signs become tombstones, markers of intervention points we collectively missed. On March 6, 2024, in West Palm Beach, Florida, a bright future was extinguished when Kezian Shaw entered Kelvi's home and committed an act of violence that would end both their lives. But this story isn't simply about how Kelvi died. It's about how the systems designed to protect her failed, how the warning signs went unheeded, and most importantly, how similar tragedies might be prevented. What makes this case particularly haunting is that Kelvi did everything right. She recognized the danger, she reported the abuse, she tried to leave, yet less than 24 hours after seeking help from authorities, she was gone. The story of Kelvi McCrae matters because it could save lives, maybe even yours or someone you care about. Throughout this investigation, we'll uncover critical warning signs that everyone should recognize, examine the crucial moments where intervention might have changed the outcome, and provide information that could make the difference between life and death. Before we continue, if you're new to this channel, subscribe now to receive potentially life-saving information about recognizing dangerous situations before they escalate. Hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss our evidence-based analyses of cases that contain crucial lessons. West Palm Beach, Florida, a vibrant coastal community known for its sunshine and cultural diversity, was where Kelvi McCrae's story began. From her earliest years, those who knew her describe a young woman whose ambition and creativity set her apart. At Inlet Grove High School, Kelvi wasn't just another student. She was someone whose presence commanded attention and whose future seemed limitless. Fashion, beauty, and entrepreneurship weren't just interests for Kelvi, they were callings. She participated in community programs and local art events where her natural eye for style and trend-setting abilities quickly gained recognition. After graduation, while many of her peers were still figuring out their paths, Kelvi had already mapped hers with remarkable clarity. Enrolling at Palm Beach State College, she pursued higher education while simultaneously building her career as a hairstylist. This wasn't merely a job for Kelvi, it was a canvas for her artistic expression and the foundation for her entrepreneurial dreams. Her dedication extended beyond aesthetics. She'd even earned a security officer license, demonstrating her comprehensive approach to building a stable, multifaceted future. Intelligence, charisma, and determination. These words repeatedly emerge when family members describe Kelvi. Her mother, Marla McKenney, speaks of a daughter whose sense of responsibility was matched only by her boundless creativity. Her uncle, Ricky Aiken, recalls a niece whose presence could transform a room, whose smile carried genuine warmth, and whose conviction about fairness was unshakable. The McCrae household was more than just a family home. It was Kelvi's sanctuary and launching pad. The strong bonds she formed there, particularly with her mother, provided the emotional foundation from which her ambitions grew. Marla wasn't simply a parent, she was Kelvi's champion, confidant, and most trusted advisor. This mother-daughter relationship, characterized by mutual respect and unwavering support, would later fuel Marla's relentless quest for justice and systemic change. In a community where opportunities for young people can sometimes feel limited, Kelvi was creating her own path. Local industry insiders had begun to take notice of her work. Peers sought her advice on style and personal branding. Teachers and mentors pointed to her as an example of what dedication and vision could achieve. At just 19, Kelvi McCrae wasn't just dreaming about success, she was actively building it. One client, one connection, one college course at a time. The connection between Kelvi and Kezian began innocently enough. At 14, they formed a friendship that evolved gradually, built on shared experiences and mutual affection. For 5 years, they navigated adolescence together, studying, dreaming, and experiencing the formative moments that shape young adults. When their relationship transformed from friendship to romance, those who knew them described it as a natural progression rather than a sudden change. What few could see, however, were the subtle shifts occurring beneath the surface. The early days of their romantic relationship carried the hallmarks of young love, intense, affirming, full of promise. Kezian was initially supportive of Kelvi's ambitions, even proud of her accomplishments. But relationships rarely remain static, and theirs began a slow transformation that would ultimately prove fatal. The living arrangement complicated matters significantly. When Kezian, who lacked stable housing, moved into Kelvi's home, the power dynamics shifted. What began as a temporary solution became a complex entanglement of emotional and practical dependencies. For Kelvi, her home, once a place of creativity and safety, gradually transformed into contested territory where her autonomy diminished by degrees. The changes were insidious rather than dramatic. Friends noticed Kezian's increasing possessiveness, masked as protection. Family members observed his growing discomfort with Kelvi's independent pursuits. The pattern established itself so gradually that recognizing it as abnormal became difficult for someone immersed in the situation. By late 2023, the relationship had deteriorated significantly. What outsiders couldn't see were the private moments of control. Checking her phone, questioning her whereabouts, isolating her from supportive relationships. The bright, ambitious young woman who had once moved through the world with confidence began to calculate her actions based on anticipated reactions. January 2024 marked a critical turning point. After more than a year together romantically, Kelvi made the decision that relationship experts recognize as the most dangerous moment for victims of domestic abuse. She chose to leave. This act of courage, this reclamation of her autonomy and future, represented both liberation and heightened risk. The breakup, while necessary, created an impossible situation. Kezian remained in Kelvi's home, ostensibly because he had nowhere else to go. This physical proximity after emotional separation created a pressure cooker environment. For Kezian, each day was a reminder of rejection. For Kelvi, each day brought the strain of navigating shared space with someone whose behavior had become increasingly unpredictable. What followed the breakup illustrates why leaving an abusive relationship is often compared to defusing a bomb. Kezian's initial response, pleading, promises to change, declarations of inability to live without her, gradually gave way to something darker. The frequency and intensity of conflict escalated. Arguments that once ended in tense silence began ending in intimidation. The psychological abuse that had been building for months began manifesting in physical form. By March 2024, 2 months after their official separation, the situation had reached a critical threshold. Kelvi was attempting to move forward, focusing on her education and career while still sharing living space with an increasingly volatile ex-partner. She likely believed that managing the situation carefully would allow for a gradual, safe transition. This calculation, one made by countless victims of domestic violence, would prove tragically miscalculated. Before we continue exploring this case, take a moment to hit the like button and share this video. Your engagement helps this critical information reach those who might desperately need it. Comment below if you've ever noticed concerning behavior in a relationship, either your own or someone else's, and what action you took. The final weeks of Kelvi McCrae's life followed a trajectory that domestic violence experts identify as textbook escalation. What began as controlling behavior transformed into outright intimidation, culminating in physical acts that signaled imminent danger. The 24-hour period before her death contained all the warning signs that research identifies as precursors to lethal violence. On March 5, 2024, just 1 day before the tragic incident, Kelvi took the brave step of reporting Kezian's behavior to authorities. Her complaint wasn't about minor disagreements or emotional manipulation. It detailed specific acts that domestic violence specialists classify as severe, high-risk indicators: strangulation, firearm threats, and property destruction. The strangulation attempt alone should have triggered an emergency response. Research consistently shows that non-fatal strangulation is one of the strongest predictors of future homicide in domestic relationships. When someone demonstrates the willingness to cut off their partner's air supply, they've crossed a threshold that frequently leads to fatal outcomes. The gun threat represented another critical warning sign. Kazan had pointed a firearm directly at Kelvi, demonstrating both the means and the mindset to inflict lethal harm. The presence of firearms in domestic disputes increases the risk of fatal outcomes by 500%, according to multiple studies. The destruction of property, specifically smashing Kelvi's car windshield, further indicated a perpetrator losing control and escalating his tactics of intimidation. Property damage often precedes physical assault, as abusers test boundaries and demonstrate their capacity for destruction. When Kelvi reported these incidents, she activated a system designed to protect those in danger. Officers responded, but what followed demonstrates the critical gaps that can occur even when procedures are followed. According to reports, police initiated a pursuit of Kazan's vehicle after the complaint, but terminated the chase due to safety protocols regarding high-speed pursuits in populated areas. This decision, made according to standard operating procedures, had devastating consequences. Kazan remained free, aware that Kelvi had reported him, and likely experiencing the desperation that often characterizes abusers who sense they're losing control. The 24-hour window between the report and the final incident represented a critical opportunity for intervention that was ultimately missed. For Kelvi's mother, Marla McKinney, questions about this period haunt her. Could additional protective measures have been implemented? Might Kelvi have been moved to a secure shelter? Could electronic monitoring or an emergency protective order have created a barrier between her daughter and danger? These questions reflect the tragic reality that domestic violence victims are often most vulnerable during precisely the time when they're actively seeking help. The act of reporting abuse frequently accelerates the abuser's timeline, pushing them toward more extreme measures to reassert control. Experts in high-risk assessment would later note that Kelvi's situation contained multiple factors associated with lethal outcomes: a recent separation, escalating violence, firearm access, threats to kill, and a perpetrator who appeared to be losing psychological stability. This constellation of factors creates what researchers call intimate partner homicide risk, a measurable likelihood of fatal violence. For those 24 hours after reporting the abuse, Kelvi continued her normal routine, attending classes, working, and staying connected with friends and family. Whether she fully recognized the danger she was in remains unknown. Many victims, even after reporting abuse, underestimate their risk level or believe that official involvement will deter further violence. Tragically, the opposite is often true. As March 5th ended and March 6th began, the mechanisms that might have protected Kelvi had failed to create adequate barriers against the danger closing in around her. The systems designed to intervene had been activated, but proved insufficient against the rapid escalation of a perpetrator determined to maintain control through any means necessary. March 6, 2024, began as an ordinary Wednesday for Kelvi McCrae. She attended her classes at Palm Beach State College, connected with clients about upcoming appointments, and returned to her West Palm Beach home in the evening. Despite the tension and fear from recent events, she was attempting to maintain normalcy, a common coping mechanism for those navigating high-stress situations. Around dinner time, Kelvi initiated a FaceTime call with 3 close friends. This virtual gathering represented something vital: connection, support, and a brief escape from the anxiety that had become her constant companion. As she prepared and ate her meal, the conversation likely provided comfort and a few moments of laughter amid her increasingly complicated circumstances. These friends would become unwitting witnesses to the unimaginable. Without warning, the casual evening conversation was interrupted by Kazan Shaw's arrival at Kelvi's home. The exact words exchanged in those initial moments remain private, known only to those who witnessed them through the digital window of the ongoing call. What is known with certainty is that the situation escalated rapidly. Within moments, what began as an interruption transformed into a horrific act of violence. Kazan, armed and evidently determined, fired multiple shots. The medical examiner would later document wounds to Kelvi's head, neck, and back, injuries that offered no chance of survival. For the friends still connected on FaceTime, these moments unfolded in real time, creating a trauma that would forever alter their lives. Their frantic calls to emergency services created an immediate response, but intervention would come too late for Kelvi. Their eyewitness accounts, though devastating to provide, would later become crucial elements in reconstructing the timeline and circumstances of that evening. After turning the weapon on Kelvi, Kasiana then used it on himself. First responders arrived to find both individuals critically injured. Their desperate efforts to preserve life continued during emergency transport to the hospital, but the severity of Kelvi's injuries allowed no possibility of recovery. She was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival. Kelvi, though also critically wounded, survived initially. For approximately 24 hours, he remained in critical condition under medical care and police supervision. This brief window created a painful limbo for Kelvi's family, a period of processing their immeasurable loss, while the person responsible still clung to life. On March 7, Kelvi succumbed to his self-inflicted injuries. The medical personnel, law enforcement officers, and crisis counselors who responded to this scene joined the growing circle of individuals affected by this tragedy. For professionals who routinely encounter human suffering, certain cases nonetheless leave lasting impressions. The loss of a young woman with such evident promise, witnessed in real time by her friends, in a situation that presented multiple opportunities for prevention, marked this as such a case. In the immediate aftermath, as news spread through West Palm Beach, the community experienced the ripple effects of collective trauma. Kelvi's classmates, clients, neighbors, and extended family began the process of absorbing an outcome that seemed both shocking and, in retrospect, horrifyingly predictable. The final moments of Kelvi's life, eating dinner, connecting with friends, maintaining normalcy despite fear, highlight the fundamental injustice at the core of domestic violence. The burden of caution, disruption, and ultimately consequence falls upon the victim rather than the perpetrator. Kelvi had done everything society asks of those experiencing abuse. She recognized the danger, she reported it, she sought help. The system's failure to adequately respond cost her everything. The investigation that followed operated within established protocols for incidents classified as murder-suicide. West Palm Beach Police Department officials processed the scene, collecting forensic evidence, documenting the positioning and relationship of key elements, and reconstructing the sequence of events leading to the tragic outcome. Despite Kesenshaw's death, authorities posthumously charged him with first-degree murder, a procedural acknowledgement of culpability that offered little comfort to those mourning Kelvi. The classification provided statistical clarity for crime reporting, but did nothing to address the systemic failures that allowed the situation to reach its fatal conclusion. The investigation confirmed what witnesses had reported. Kizayan entered Kelvi's home, armed and with apparent intent, committed the act of violence that ended her life, and then turned the weapon on himself. What no investigation could adequately explain was why the warning signs, so clearly documented just 24 hours earlier, failed to trigger protective interventions that might have saved her. For Marla McKenney, Kelvi's mother, grief quickly transformed into righteous anger. In media interviews and community forums, she articulated questions that demanded answers. Why wasn't her daughter offered emergency shelter after reporting strangulation and firearm threats? Why was the pursuit of Kasian terminated? What protocols existed for high-risk cases, and why weren't they activated? "My daughter did everything right," Marla repeated in interviews, her voice carrying both personal anguish and public purpose. She recognized the danger, she reported it, she asked for help. The system failed her completely. Her outcry resonated throughout West Palm Beach and beyond, capturing media attention and community support. Local organizations focused on domestic violence prevention amplified her message, using Kelvi's story to illustrate the critical gaps in protection for those most vulnerable. Community forums and vigils began almost immediately, serving dual purposes of commemoration and mobilization. Ricky Aiken, Kelvi's uncle, emerged as a powerful advocate, channeling his grief into education and activism. At candlelight gatherings and community meetings, he spoke of his niece's vibrant spirit, while demanding accountability from institutions tasked with prevention and protection. Local government officials found themselves facing difficult questions about resource allocation, training protocols, and interagency communication. The police department initiated an internal review of their response to Kelvi's initial report, examining the decision-making process that led to terminating the pursuit of Kasian and the follow-up measures taken afterward. Domestic violence advocates pointed to specific failures in the system: inadequate danger assessment protocols, insufficient emergency housing options, limited coordination between law enforcement and victim services, and the absence of mandatory monitoring for high-risk offenders between initial report and formal charges. Media coverage extended beyond local outlets, as Kelvi's story came to represent a broader narrative about systemic failings in domestic violence response. National organizations cited her case as evidence of the urgent need for reform, highlighting the particular vulnerabilities of young women attempting to leave controlling relationships. For the West Palm Beach community, particularly those closest to Kelvi, the investigation's findings offered information but not resolution. The clinical details of what happened provided no comfort against the knowledge that it could have been prevented. Technical explanations about procedural limitations and resource constraints felt hollow against the reality of a promising life cut short. The public response to Kelvi's death transcended the specifics of her case, tapping into a collective awareness that her story represented thousands of others, some already ended in tragedy, others still unfolding in homes across the country. The question at the heart of this response was both simple and profound. How many warnings does a system need before it takes action to protect those at risk? If you've found value in this analysis so far, please take a moment to comment below with any warning signs you've recognized in relationships around you. Your insights might help others identify dangerous situations before they escalate. The tragedy of Kelvi McCrae provides critical lessons about relationship danger signs that everyone should recognize. These indicators, when identified early, can create opportunities for intervention and potentially save lives. The most significant warning sign in Kelvi and Kezian's relationship was his inability to accept the breakup. Research consistently shows that rejection, particularly when coupled with continued proximity, creates high-risk situations. When someone refuses to acknowledge a relationship's end or makes statements suggesting they cannot live without their partner, these aren't romantic declarations, they're danger signals. Control behaviors represented another crucial indicator. Kezian's gradual increase in monitoring Kelvi's activities, questioning her whereabouts and attempting to influence her decisions, followed a pattern that domestic violence experts identify as coercive control. This pattern typically intensifies over time, beginning with seemingly protective behaviors that progressively restrict autonomy. Living arrangements created particular vulnerability. When Kezian remained in Kelvi's home after their relationship ended, it eliminated the physical boundary that might have protected her. Housing insecurity often complicates separation from dangerous partners, forcing practical considerations to override safety concerns. The presence of a firearm escalated the situation from potentially dangerous to immediately life-threatening. Access to weapons, especially in contexts where threats have already occurred, increases lethality risk exponentially. When Kezian displayed the weapon threateningly, this represented a clear indication of potential homicidal intent. Strangulation attempts constitute one of the most reliable predictors of future homicide. When Kezian restricted Kelvi's breathing, he crossed a threshold that research links directly to fatal outcomes. This single act should trigger immediate, comprehensive protective measures in any domestic situation. Property destruction, specifically targeting Kelvi's vehicle, demonstrated a willingness to escalate from threats to action. Damaging possessions often serves as a precursor to physical assault, indicating deteriorating impulse control and increasing rage. For those observing potential domestic violence situations, understanding the significance of these indicators can be life-saving. Recognition creates the possibility of earlier intervention, whether through direct support, connection to resources, or involvement of authorities before situations become lethal. Safety planning represents a critical tool for those in potentially dangerous relationships. This includes identifying trusted contacts who can respond to distress signals, preparing essential documents and emergency funds, establishing code words with trusted friends, mapping escape routes, and connecting with domestic violence organizations that offer specialized support. The period immediately following separation requires heightened vigilance. Research consistently identifies this as the most dangerous time for victims, when perpetrators often escalate their behavior in response to perceived loss of control. During this phase, routine safety measures may prove insufficient against determined aggressors. Perhaps the most important lesson from Kelvi's story is that system responses must match the urgency of the situation. When high-risk indicators appear, particularly in combination, immediate, comprehensive protective measures become essential. The 24-hour window between Kelvi's report and her death represented a critical intervention opportunity that required urgent, coordinated action rather than standard procedural responses. Kelvi McCrae's memory now extends far beyond her 19 years of life. Through the advocacy of her family and the response of her community, her story has become a catalyst for change in how domestic violence cases are handled in West Palm Beach and beyond. Marla McKenney has transformed her grief into purpose, establishing the Kelvi's Light Foundation to advocate for enhanced protective measures for those reporting domestic abuse. The organization focuses particularly on danger assessment protocols, pushing for standardized tools that help law enforcement and service providers identify high-risk situations requiring immediate intervention. Ricky Aiken, building on his existing community work, has incorporated domestic violence education into his youth mentorship programs. His presentations in local schools emphasize healthy relationship dynamics and early recognition of controlling behaviors, helping young people establish boundaries before abuse patterns develop. Palm Beach State College, where Kelvi was pursuing her education, has established a scholarship in her name for students demonstrating entrepreneurial spirit and community engagement. This educational legacy ensures that her ambitions continue to create opportunity even after her life was cut short. The West Palm Beach Police Department, responding to community pressure and internal review, has implemented revised protocols for domestic violence calls involving strangulation or firearm threats. These now trigger automatic high-risk assessment, expedited protective orders, and immediate safety planning with specialized advocates. Local domestic violence shelters have expanded their emergency housing capacity and established priority placement for cases involving specific high-risk indicators. The Kelvi McCrae protocol provides expedited services for individuals reporting strangulation, weapon threats, or post-separation harassment. State legislators have introduced bills aimed at strengthening protections during the critical period between initial reports and formal charges. These include provisions for emergency monitoring, temporary firearm surrender requirements, and enhanced penalties for violations of protective measures. Media coverage of these advocacy efforts has expanded awareness beyond the immediate community, connecting Kelvi's story to the broader movement addressing domestic violence nationwide. Her case now appears in training materials for law enforcement, healthcare providers, and social service agencies, as an example of how quickly situations can escalate and why rapid, comprehensive intervention matters. For those directly impacted by Kelvi's death, her family, friends, classmates, and clients, participation in these advocacy efforts provides a channel for grief that honors her memory through meaningful action. Their collective voices have transformed a personal tragedy into a powerful force for institutional change and public education. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, resources are available 24/7. Contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-797-233 or text START to 88788. Remember to subscribe to this channel for more information that could help you recognize dangerous situations before they escalate. When we examine cases like Kelvi McCrae's, we confront a profound tension between individual choices and systemic responsibilities. Kelvi made the right individual choices, recognizing danger, seeking separation, reporting threats. Yet these correct actions weren't enough to protect her in the absence of adequate systemic responses. This reality challenges us to move beyond viewing domestic violence as a private matter, requiring only personal solutions. The interconnected failures that contributed to Kelvi's death, from insufficient protective measures to inadequate danger assessment, reveal the need for a coordinated community response that recognizes the true lethality risk in these situations. Her story illuminates how quickly situations can escalate from controlling behavior to lethal violence, particularly during separation. The 24-hour window between her report and her death represents both the urgent timeframe in which protective intervention must occur and the devastating consequences when that intervention falls short. For the systems and individuals tasked with protection, Kelvi's case offers crucial insight into the limitations of standardized responses to non-standardized threats. When strangulation, weapon threats, and separation converge, the response must match the heightened risk with heightened protection. not simply follow routine protocols designed for lower-risk scenarios. The community impact of this tragedy extends far beyond those who knew Kelvi personally. Each domestic homicide creates ripples of trauma that affect witnesses, first responders, family members, friends, classmates, and neighbors. These collective wounds heal slowly, leaving communities with both grief for what was lost and responsibility for what might be prevented in the future. Kelvi McCrae's unrealized potential, her entrepreneurial dreams, her creative vision, her capacity for connection and joy, represents the true cost of domestic violence. Beyond statistics and case files lies the incalculable loss of human possibility, of futures that will never unfold, of contributions never made. As we conclude this examination of Kelvi's story, we're left with both sorrow and purpose. The systems that failed her are human creations capable of human improvement. The warning signs missed or minimized can be better recognized and responded to. The coordination gaps between agencies can be bridged. The training deficits can be addressed. The most meaningful honor we can offer Kelvi's memory is attention. Attention to the warning signs in relationships around us. Attention to the needs of those attempting to safely separate from dangerous partners. Attention to the policies and practices that determine whether intervention arrives in time. In our next episode, we'll examine how digital technology is creating new forms of intimate partner surveillance and control, and how victims are finding innovative ways to seek help despite increasingly sophisticated monitoring. Subscribe now so you don't miss this critical information that could help you recognize these emerging threats.